My next guest is the unconventional economist, Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business. Welcome, Leith.
G'day, David. Thanks for having me on again.
A great pleasure. You had a headline saying Australians reject Albo's immigration tsunami. I noticed on your website. What is that all about?
Yeah, so basically the Australian Population Research Institute released, they do an annual study of, people's views in immigration. And what it showed is that, Australians' views against immigration have firmed, they've strengthened. And basically, nearly half of Australians now believe that immigration should be drastically reduced. So absolutely slashed. And not many Australians actually think it should be increased. And also, nearly 3/4 of Australians believe that Australia's population is big enough already. So it's basically just another one of these things where, by the government's attitudes towards immigration and population growth, etc., are out of step with Australians. Australians want lower immigration than we've had, and for good reason. Whereas the political class, whether that's the politicians and big business and also the Australian Treasury, keep pushing for higher levels of immigration. So it's just another one of those cases where they are out of step with what the wishes of the Australian people.
And the Treasury wants higher immigration just for mathematical purity in relation to the GDP, I suppose.
Yeah, there's sort of two reasons why the Australian Treasury loves this Big Australia immigration policy. So the first one, obviously, is that it juices headline GDP growth. So basically, when the population grows by 2.5%, as it did in the year to September, which is, the highest growth since 1952 in percentage terms, it means that basically the economy the economy has a 2.5% head start already. So if you grow the population by 2.5%, you can obviously increase GDP by a similar measure because more people in inputs means more outputs in spending and all that sort of thing. So it's a way to basically, gloss over the fact that we've been in a per capita recession. And the Australian Treasury also loves big migration because the federal government collects about 80% of the nation's tax revenue. So what this means is that if you run a big migration policy, you collect a whole bunch more personal income taxes because, obviously you have more migrants coming into work. The federal government gets to capture that because it collects all the personal income taxes. And then it gets a second dose through bracket creep because of inflation. But those costs are then obviously pushed on to the state governments, who only collect about 13% of the taxes, and local governments, which would collect about 7%. And it's basically a way for the federal government to privatise the gains of immigration while the costs are pushed onto the states, the local governments, and also you and me, because we all get our quality of life degraded, obviously through more congestion. We've got to pay more user charges for things like toll roads, which we wouldn't need to build if we didn't grow the population so aggressively, and all those sorts of things.
You've raised the issue of the role of the universities in all this. That's an unusual idea that the universities are involved in this immigration problem and the housing problem. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, actually, the universities are actually one of the key middlemen of the Australian of Australia's immigration story. So basically, one of the biggest growth vectors for immigration is international students. So the latest Home Affairs data, which came out, I think it was last week for February, showed that we had about over 700,000 international students in the country, which is a record high. It's about 100,000 more than we had at the peak of pre-pandemic. And basically, the biggest driver of net overseas migration currently is actually international students, so foreign students. And well, let's be quite honest here. Australia only attracts huge numbers of international students because they want to come here to work and also hopefully to live, to become residents and live here long term. And so basically Australia attracts huge numbers, mostly from, South Asia, like places like India and Nepal, as well as China. They come here because we offer very generous work rights, like more generous than just about every other country. And we also offer the very good prospects to live here long term or become a permanent resident. And that's the reason why we get so many international students. And it's also one of the reasons why immigration is so high. And the universities basically get to clip the ticket. So they are the middleman that gets to, once again, like the Australian Treasury, privatise the gains from immigration through, fees and all that sort of thing, while the costs through the rental market, which is obviously, the rental vacancy rates at a record low, got surging rents, and the broader costs in society are actually borne by everyone else.
So they're not really selling quality education. What they're really selling is a key to get into Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Backdoor migration. And there's a survey that comes out every year by Navitas, which is like an international education, data source. And they showed that particularly for students from Africa and South Asia, so that's India, Nepal, etc., um, their he their number one concern regarding immigration is work rights, and immigration also ranks very highly. And interestingly, the least important concern for these students is quality of education. So that sort of explains, India and Nepal are the fastest growing segments of international students, and they're coming here because they want to work and because they want permanent residency. And quality of education is their least concern. So they're not coming over here for quality; they're coming over here for basically migration purposes. And that's basically borne out in the data. And unfortunately, it's not a very good system. And it gets sold to us as being this, Australia's third or fourth biggest export, when that's actually a fake figure derived from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And the reason why international international student exports, which they say is about $40 billion a year, is actually a fake figure, is because the ABS, for some stupid reason, has decided to count all expenditure by international students by people on a student visa in Australia as an export. Now, we all know that the majority of students that come over here come work while they study. So they work in jobs, and especially if they're from South Asia, they don't come over here with much money at all. And they come over here with, not very much money, enroll in courses, often they're bogus courses, and then they basically work while they're here. And the ABS, for some stupid reason, has decided to count all that money that they earn here and then spend as an export, even though it's earned here. And just to tell you how ridiculous that is, if my daughter, who's currently 13, if she grows up and goes to university, moves out of home, moves out with her friends into a rental house, works a part-time job to pay most of her bills, if she, could magically classify herself as an international student, suddenly all that expenditure would be counted as an export when it's all earned here.
Yes.
So the whole system is based on a bit of a sham. And unfortunately, it's a great marketing point. We need these record international student numbers are, driving delivering Australia an export boom. That export money is helping us to pay for hospitals and schools and all this other stuff, and it's complete bogus. It's just economic activity, which is the same for all immigration. You bring people over, they got to work, they got to spend money, etc. That creates economic activity. Big deal. But the thing we care about is actually the per capita outcomes, so the outcomes per person. And unambiguously, that has gotten worse. Like over the really last 20 years, but especially, over the past sort of 18 months, that we've had this big Australia migration.
So you would say they should calculate the statistics differently, but also the universities should be obliged to provide accommodation to international students. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, absolutely. So the latest data shows that basically only 20% of international students that study at universities use student housing. So that means that 80% of them rent in the private market. And so basically, if we grow our student cohort by 300,000 in a year, we're going to need, 240,000, whatever it is, additional rental homes for them. And that's effectively what's happening here. So my view is that we should require the universities to provide student housing in proportion to the number of international students they got. So,
Right.
pick a ratio. So say 50%, right? So if Melbourne University has 4,000 international students on its campus, it should provide at least 2,000 student accommodation for them. And what that would do is it basically take pressure off the private rental market, and it would also but also effectively put a cap on international students. They'll say, okay, if you want to have more international students, you got to provide more on-campus accommodations. You got to build more student accommodation on campus. If you can't do it, you can't have more students.
Yes. And
But we don't
just,
do that here. We
just
basically just let them grow it exponentially.
yes, thank you, Ethan. Just briefly, you mentioned on your site that Canada fires unemployment warning shot at Australia. What does that refer to?
Well, okay, so if you think Australia's immigration system is bananas at the moment, right? We had nearly 550,000 net overseas migrants in the year to September, which was a record. We've never seen numbers like that before. Canada is even more absurd. So Canada had just over 1.2 million net overseas migrants last calendar year, so in the year to 31 December. And what it's done is it's effectively, created a similar rental crisis to what we've got now, but also Canada isn't producing enough jobs for those migrants. And now its unemployment rate has surged to, 6%. It's rocketed in the last year because basically its labour supply is growing a lot faster than its labour demand, its demand for jobs from employers. And there's been a lot of reports recently on, lots of videos on TikTok, on YouTube, et cetera, showing these massive lines of mostly foreign students in Canada lining up for menial jobs, like to work in a bottle shop. There'll be a line of hundreds of students line up to try and get one of those jobs. And basically, it's sort of a bit of a warning shot. So Canada's similar to Australia in that their overall economy is growing still. So they've still got GDP growth, but per capita, they're all going backwards quite quickly. That's similar to what we've got here because they're running their population growth's, like 3.2%. It's higher than ours. Ours are 2.5%. And so the overall economy is growing, but everyone's slice of the pie is shrinking. Their unemployment rate's rising, and we've got an absolutely disastrous rental crisis because they're growing the population so much faster than they can build houses. And it's basically just a worse version of what we're happening in Australia. and it's sort of an omen for Australia of what will happen to us if we keep going down this road.
Once again, Leith, you really bring to us common sense, and it's very good to have an economist giving us common sense. Leith Van Onselen, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, David. I'll speak to you next time.
Thank you. Thank you, Leith.